don't see him on yet. Oh, maybe he is.
I am here, Ray.
You're good. Again, I appreciate everybody signing on today. And this is, I think, our eighth total online presentation from our Near Coffee Spring Workshop. We have one more that I have scheduled, and we'll be sending that out shortly after the meeting today. So be on the look for that. Everybody will get half a credit hour for viewing today, as we have with all of these, from both SAF and the Maine Board of Licensure. Please use the chat function for any questions, and we'll try to moderate through those as we get towards the end. Also, stay tuned for other sessions. I'm working on continuing with these online sessions in lieu of a spring meeting. So we're going to see if we can do as much as we can do. Last point I'll make is everyone that is here today, even though we try to keep track of attendance by using the participation list, if everybody can email Cindy Pascal at cindypascal@maine.edu and let us know that you're here. That way she has your current email address and we can send the certificates to you. So with that, I'll be quiet, and Mike, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Ray, and good afternoon, everybody. Mike Precio here with the Maine Forest Service Insect and Disease Lab, coming to you live from Augusta. I'm going to stop my video so I don't have to watch myself, and hat and hair season is here, but let me know if there's any audio issues along the way. And today I'm going to be giving you all a forest health update for the state of Maine. So I left this in here for nostalgia's sake. I was supposed to see all of you hopefully in person this past March at the meeting. That didn't happen. So that would have been mostly an update for events from 2019. So basically today you're going to get some of both years rolled into one. So here we go. All right, I'll start with emerald ash borer, and yeah, you'll see several quarantine updates throughout this presentation, because that's one of the things I deal with here at the Insect and Disease Lab is regulated insects. So it's been a busy season for emerald ash borer and new detections. So the last detection of EAB to happen outside of a regulated area was all the way back in October of 2019, and that's when we found EAB in the city of Portland. So that led to a revision of the previous quarantine zone. So here, this map on the right, you can see what the currently regulated area looks like for southern Maine. So it's now, with that Portland find, been expanded to all of York County, all of Cumberland County, and the 5 southernmost towns in Oxford County. And here in the red and orange, you can see the generally infested area. There are quite a few new additions to those that aren't on this map, but that'll be coming soon as we wrap up our 2020 sampling season. So, and then, yeah, I'm not sure where the audience is. I'm assuming statewide. So just to let everybody know, there are currently 2 regulated areas for EAB, the larger one being in southern Maine, but also right up in northern Aroostook County, there is a second regulated area. So a big way of how we find emerald ash borer around the state is through a girdled trap tree survey. So the girdled trap tree program basically involves going out and girdling a tree, an ash tree in the spring to induce stress that's attracted to emerald ash borer, and so making those trees more likely to become infested. So we do that in both regulated and non-regulated areas. So the 2020 program consisted of 34 trees around the state. And all the detections in 2020 here through the girdled trap tree program fortunately occurred in areas that are already regulated. So no new finds in 2020 outside of the regulated area. We had new detections within both regulated zones. So up north, we had new trees found in Frenchville, Grand Isle, and Van Buren. And highlighting the importance of this survey, that's the first known detection in Van Buren to come through this survey for them. And then in the southern EAB regulated area, also in the towns of Gorham, then 2 additional sites in Portland and South Berwick. And then again, highlighting the importance of Gorham, the first detection of EAB in that town coming through this program. So if anybody's interested out there on the webinar today, we utilize citizen volunteers to do a lot of this girdled trap tree survey work, and mainly by folks volunteering trees to be girdled. So if anybody's interested in that, you can find it online, how to get signed up for the 2021 Girdled Trap Tree Program. And Colleen Tierling is the entomologist that's in charge of that. So she'll follow up with you if you're interested. Other new detections in 2020. So we do a purple prism trap survey as well around the state. We hung 199 traps. All of those came back negative for 2020. We do have funding to do that survey again in 2021, so we'll be doing that next year. After that, funding becomes questionable because we expect by then EAB will be federally deregulated. So again, currently there's federal regulations that apply to emerald ash borer in addition to our main state regulations. Another exciting thing in Kittery, we knew EAB already existed in Kittery, but we found it using the technique of biosurveillance. So this is really interesting. There's a ground nesting wasp called Cerceris fumipennis, and basically these wasps hunt EAB and related insects, the metallic wood boring beetles there, to provision nests for their young. So they're heat-seeking missiles, so to speak, for related beetles to EAB. So they actually found a couple using this technique and monitoring those colonies. Another development in 2020. So we always get a ton of reports of suspected EAB trees. Fortunately, up until now, most of those have been false alarms, trees that look very suspect for EAB. But for the first time this year, we had 5 new reports coming in from the public or foresters where EAB was, not only suspected, but actually identified by the public. So you can see those towns there in Cape Nettic and York, and the Newfield, Agunquit, Parsonsfield, and Shapley there. So, and then in addition to that, we do a lot of just independent looking around. So this is the most recent detection from just the other week here in Waterboro. You can see one of our field techs, Regina, saw a suspicious tree out there. You can see the woodpecker damage here, and then lo and behold, peeling that tree, the bark away from that tree reveals the insect galleries within. So those are the new finds. So EAB definitely becoming more established in the regulated areas and moving around those regulated areas. We'll continue to watch out for EAB in the non-regulated areas. In terms of hopes for the future forest, we know that EAB is very lethal. 99% or greater of our ash will likely succumb to EAB infestation over the next decades. So we're looking to biological control as a management tool for the future forest. So biological control involves importing these natural enemies from the native range of emerald ash borer in Asia. And again, these are very specific parasitoids that basically hunt out and destroy EAB eggs and larvae. So we're relying on them to do some of the heavy lifting for us and finding EAB out in the woods. So we've been releasing those for a couple of years now. So up north, we've released 3 species in the northern zone. And then we've released 2 species in the southern zone. Or actually, no, just Tetrasticus, just 1 species released for the first time in the southern zone this year. Okay. All right, that's it for EAB for now. I'm sure there'll be more developments there. Another quarantine zone revision was for hemlock woolly adelgid. This happened early on in March 2020, but again, this is the first time I'm getting to talk to this group. So this was basically expanded for a good portion of coastal Maine, all the way up to Washington County here. So these are the areas where hemlock woolly adelgid is likely to be found, or we expect it could be found. Again, in this quarantine relates not only to forest trees, but also nursery stock. So this is the area of concern for hemlock woolly adelgid. Just be aware, if anybody works in this area and is moving any sort of hemlock material, you can see the regulated materials listed below here, including things like chips or any uncomposted bark. Those are all regulated items that should not be leaving this blue highlighted area without necessary or required permitting. So here's what hemlock woolly adelgid looks like. This is one that's somewhat easy to go out and find. So if you have hemlocks on your property, this is all you really have to look for to know. And winter is a good time to do this. So these little white cottony masses on the underside of branches, that's a good winter survey activity for landowners. Again, this is somewhat older news, but again, bears repeating. Gypsy moth is a regulated insect. Up until 2019, not all of Maine was regulated. So this northern portion here of some of the northern counties in the orange here was not regulated until 2019. So Maine is currently now entirely, regulated for gypsy moth. So that's an important thing to know if you're moving forest products. Here's what we were finding, in this area prior to it being regulated. These are results from our trapping program up there. So you can certainly see, even though the area was not regulated, gypsy moth was already there. And just to give you a little bit of national perspective, you can see this is a regulated insect federally, all the way to eastern Minnesota here, all the way to Maine now. So quite a huge regulated area. So within a regulated area, products can move freely. Again, even though that's allowable, we don't want to necessarily move any gypsy moth life stages. This is the really important one here. You can see a female moth, and this is a fresh egg mass. So this is a really good winter activity too, to go out and look for these egg masses and dispose of them. But yeah, these are plastered to anything. Obviously trees in the forest, but also, things like boat trailers, RVs, things like that. So keep an eye out for anything like that. Make sure you're not moving that, even though the whole state is regulated for gypsy moth now. All right, brown-tailed moth. A lot of folks are probably familiar with this. Unfortunately, we didn't catch much of a break in 2020, and so brown-tailed moth actually continued to expand its range here in Maine. One of the things we hope and rely on for population control or some natural controls in the form of some different fungi and diseases that affect brown-tailed moth and some other similar species of caterpillars. A lot of that fungus and disease spread is dependent upon those populations. So the most heavily impacted counties: Androscoggin, Kennebec, Knox, and Waldo. So that's not much of a surprise. And those of you that live there are probably well aware of that fact. And, a lot of how we survey for brown-tailed moth to generate our risk maps is through a winter web survey. So you can see some of the winter webs here on the right-hand side. So we go out and look for those when they're fresh. That's actually usually performed most efficiently, believe it or not, through a windshield survey in the vehicle. Obviously, with COVID regulations right now, that's going to be difficult. So we're trying to figure out how to accomplish some of that winter survey for brown-tailed moth. And this is, what that survey is designed to do, is to produce these risk maps. So I have both maps up here, one for 2019 and then the one for this past year, 2020. So again, the same core area is generally, affected, coastal Maine there, but you can see from these maps how that core infested area or affected area in 2019 kind of shifted a little bit eastward to this core area here in 2020. We used to focus our survey really on that core infested area with some observations that we were seeing very low populations elsewhere. We really did expand our survey area to cover pretty much all of coastal Maine. And so you can see some areas that were surveyed in 2020 that we didn't necessarily look at in 2019 incorporated into this risk map here. So you can see there are some very low populations basically in all of coastal Maine. So we'll be interested to see how these populations shift in the upcoming years here. And like I said, hopefully we'll catch a break and we'll receive some of that weather that's necessary to cause some of this population collapse. But for the time being, it's not looking great. Another way we survey for brown-tailed moth is through aerial survey. So fortunately, we were able to still accomplish aerial survey in 2020 despite everything going on. So this map on the left here you can see the areas that we survey around the state. So we do try to get good coverage statewide, and we were fortunately able to do so. In addition to the statewide survey, that's flown all the way up north here, we do a lot of extra survey work specifically just for brown-tailed moth. So some flights that are dedicated just to documenting that damage. So they occur basically at two different times, one in the spring. So this is when the caterpillars are becoming mature and they're doing a lot of heavy feeding. So that's a great time to observe damage of the current year generation. So you can see several areas of core affected areas, but certainly brown-tailed moth existing all throughout this area here in mid-coast Maine. And then the second time we go out and do survey is in the early fall. And so the eggs that have been laid that current year and developed into early instar caterpillars, young caterpillars that will overwinter, before they go into those winter webs that we look for over the winter months, they do a little bit of feeding called skeletonizing. So it kind of creates a brownish appearance to oak leaves primarily and other host plants early on in the season there before leaves start to turn color for natural reasons in the fall. So we can document that from the air too. So those are some of the areas we know we have big populations of overwintering brown-tailed moth caterpillars, and then those areas will again likely be hard hit in the upcoming season. Winter moth is an insect that primarily affects southern Maine. So that's one of the more successful stories we have here as far as our management programs. A lot of these insects are sometimes beyond control or really subject just to natural controls in addition to our efforts. But we have a really interesting biological control program in place for winter moth. So there is a parasitoid fly, Cyzenus albicans, that attacks winter moth. And so we're basically able to go out and collect caterpillars, bring them into the lab, feed them until they pupate, and then we send those pupae to the University of Massachusetts to the Elkington lab, where they're assessed for parasitism, so they can actually determine which pupae are infested or parasitized by the fly and which are not, and then they send us back just the parasitized ones. And then what we do is we set them out in emergence cages like this in the fall, put the pupae in the soil there where they overwinter as they naturally would. And then we go back in the spring and we monitor these and basically release the adult flies that will then go lay their eggs in areas where winter moth is feeding. They can detect that feeding and they lay their eggs on the leaves that are then again ingested by the feeding caterpillars, and they become parasitized. So we've been doing this for quite a few years now. You can see here the program began in Harpswell all the way back in 2013 in Cape Elizabeth. So again, we've been releasing parasitized pupae or adult flies technically every year since then, and then going to new locations and collecting parasitized caterpillars and pupae there to move the release sites around. So knowing which site has been the most severely affected in a given year, that's where we usually choose to release. So you can see the past 2 years here, Boothbay and then East Boothbay have been the hardest hit. So again, we're moving these emergence cages around there to introduce the populations of parasitoid flies there to where they'll be self-sustaining. So again, we can go back to our original release sites and we find that we can recover these flies years after being released. So that indicates that they're actually reproducing on their own and established at those sites. And so that's a good thing. We've seen observed pretty marked decreases in the caterpillar populations and winter moth populations on their own. But this past year was pretty interesting. We went out to do our annual collection, and this is what you see here on the right. You basically go out and shake the trees and collect the caterpillars that fall out on a tarp, and pretty much everything that was coming out of the trees was disease like this, and we were unable to use it for this program. We had very reduced numbers this year It's believed that there's some sort of pathogen going on. The other possibility would be some sort of late frost event in the areas where we were collecting that caused these caterpillars to die of cold exposure. So I think they're still looking at whether or not they can identify any disease or fungus affecting these dead caterpillars we collected, but the jury is still out on that one. So I'll move up north to a northern pest. So spruce budworm is a native pest that basically occurs on average 40-year cycles. So some of you on the webinar today might certainly remember the last great outbreak of the basically starting, we'll say early 70s to the mid 80s, but the core infestation outbreak period being the mid to late 70s and early 80s there. So certainly devastating to the spruce fir forests of northern Maine, but it's been mostly quiet since then. So as expected, but now we're getting to that approximately 40-year mark where we'd expect to see the populations might start to build as we move into another natural outbreak. Further north in Canada, that outbreak has certainly been going on, and this is typically an insect that outbreaks regionally. That last great outbreak I spoke, even extending to the lake states and Canada in those areas as well. So we know that there's a raging outbreak going on north of us in Canada. We've been spared so far, but 2019 was a pretty significant year. They're able to model dispersal of spruce budworm using some pretty sophisticated temperature and weather data now, and in big flights, this is the sort of thing that'll even show up on the radar looking like snow in the middle of summer. But anyways, we're privy to some of these flight models from the Canadians, and they show that in 2019 there was two pretty major flights. So basically they ascend into the lower atmosphere at nighttime, and depending on the wind direction and temperatures and stuff like that, they'll kind of be dispersed on those prevailing winds and things like that. So most of the time it blows out to the northeast and we're spared. But again, in 2019, two big flights in July where the conditions were right for all of these Canadian moths to migrate all the way to Maine overnight and be deposited here alive, shown by these little sun emblems here. So we know that happened, and that certainly showed up in our trap results. So fortunately, we have a pheromone that we can use for trapping spruce budworm that's quite effective. So we operate this extensive network of traps all over northern Maine and western Maine, all the way to down east even. So but the core area where we're looking at is the spruce fir forest in northern Maine right here. So you can see kind of the difference here. 2018 trap catches were up. So these are, again, adult moths being caught in these traps. And you can see the difference here to 2019. Obviously, these traps are covering a lot more moths than average. So it's the maps speak for themselves. We're still working on the 2020 data right now. These traps don't come in until the end of the season. So we're currently working on counting the trap samples right now to see where we stand in 2020. Another thing we do in terms of budworm, the early instar larvae overwinter, so we can go out and survey for those as well. So at these pheromone sites and some others, we go out in the winter in cooperation with the University of Maine, the CFRU there, and we do branch sampling. So basically you trim small sections of branches, and it goes through a chemical treatment in a lab to force any small spruce budworm larvae to emerge onto a filter that can then be counted. So that's what happens. We send these to a lab in Canada, and they do it for us, where they've got the system down. So you can see some of these results from, again, 2019, and the 2020 data will be outstanding for quite some time. Especially given everything going on. But all these red dots are areas where we actually recovered spruce budworm larvae overwintering. So when you pair those with some of the pheromone trap catches and some of the other visual survey work you do, you can kind of start to paint a picture on where we might start to experience problems in the upcoming year here. So again, these numbers are still low. relatively speaking, but they might be building. So once we start to get to the 7 larvae per branch threshold, that's when the time when management action starts to get considered there. So we're still in this 3 to 4 range at best, with most sites being less than that. But again, we'll see what 2020 brings in terms of those populations. And we might expect an increase. So basically, since that last great outbreak occurred, we really haven't seen larvae that you can find them. Again, it's a native insect, but unless you're really, really looking for them, they're pretty hard to find at their background levels when they're not in outbreak mode. So again, since maybe the late 1980s or the 1990s, at the tail end of that last mega outbreak, was the last time you could just go out and easily find these larvae in spruce fir across any part of the state. So knowing that we had these big influxes of Canadian moths in 2019 and what looks like potentially good survival, we go out and we do some visual survey and assess branches for defoliation during the summer months as well. So here you can see our senior entomology tech up north did a series of 60 sites all across northern Maine. And here's what it looks like. There's a mature larva there, and then you can see some of this very, minor feeding damage at this point. This is pretty typical at low levels here, and some of the webbing there. So, but yeah, certainly at most of the sites he stopped at, and some of the sites I stopped at when I was visiting up there and working up there, you could basically find these larvae pretty easily, or more easily than we'd hope to. So yeah, here you can see again, certainly some core areas with a little bit more activity. We're still generally low, but again, certainly we're starting to have a little bit of concern that these populations are starting to build here. All right, that's it for spruce budworms. So let's see, I think I have 10 minutes left. Move on to another interesting thing from 2020 here. This is spotted lanternfly. So maybe folks have heard of this already, maybe they haven't. This is one of the new invasive species on everybody's radar. So you can see here from this map, the core infested area is really in central and eastern Pennsylvania. This has been expanded. So, and this is kind of like gypsy moth, an insect that really travels well in the fact that it'll lay egg masses on basically anything here. So it's a pretty distinct insect, so fortunately pretty easy to identify. Here you can see multiple life stages of it, the early nymphs, the later nymphs, and then the adult here, and especially the adult with the wings spread. Yeah, hopefully can't mistake it for much else, but certainly, put this in your memory and be on the lookout for this. But again, we did have an incident with accidental human movement. So some trees came from Pennsylvania, from this infested area, through the nursery trade to Maine. Fortunately, we were able to have it made aware to us and inspect some of these trees. But you can see this is what you're looking at here. This is fortunately an old egg mass. The new egg mass wouldn't look much different. Also very well camouflaged and hard to detect, but fortunately these were old, so we think that some of these hatched before they were ever shipped out of Pennsylvania, but some of them might have hatched here in Maine. So we're going to continue to follow up with these sites and make sure that next year would be the earliest time that we can hopefully determine that there is certainly no living adults or nymphs to emerge and get established here in Maine. So fortunately, one of the favorite host plants is also an invasive species that's called tree of heaven. We don't have big populations of that here in Maine, but this insect can survive on other plants. It has a very big host range that includes both forest trees and a lot of agricultural crops. So basically, that's something that's on our radar that we're worried about. Another couple highlights from 2020, we had some interesting drought and weather events. So anybody up north knows that certainly Bristol County was declared a drought disaster area in 2020. We had a pretty unusual fire season, as a nation, but certainly here in Maine with, I think, if not the record, close to a record number of wildfires at 1,111 there. Fortunately, they stayed small, averaging not much better than an acre each, but certainly this is a lot more fire activity than we're used to. And, drought's something that you don't always necessarily see the impact on the forest right away. So the upcoming years will be pretty telling. We had kind of a freak hailstorm in midsummer there. So about 2,000 acres of damage there in the Sanford area. And if anybody lives there, you're probably well aware of it, or you've seen damaged trees if you didn't know what it was. So yeah, basically focused around the airport there. You can kind of see the difference between the healthy canopy and the grayed out canopy. And this is a canopy detector, so you have to flip it around, but that's that pond right there that you're looking at, and that's the airport there. So again, that core area where they saw the greenness disappear from the canopy using satellite imagery and things like that, really matches up well. And this is what hail does. You can see the tops of these branches, just pulverized by large, heavy hail. And this exposes trees to a lot of introduced disease and stuff like that if they don't heal properly. So again, this is an area that'll probably see some lasting effects in the coming years here. On the forest disease side, so we didn't catch a break with this either. A lot of this disease is weather dependent as well. So certainly continuing here in Maine, both our white pines and our red pines kind of suffering. So there's a complex of needle diseases on the white pine that certainly continue to linger here. As well as on red pine. So Diplodion, Serococcus, shoot blights. So a lot of the pine in Maine in bad shape here. So you might have seen that as well. Another watch out species I'll mention on the disease side is oak wilt. So this is something we're really concerned about given the oak resource, especially in southern Maine. But this is a very fast acting and lethal disease, especially to the red oak group. So if it does show up here in Maine, it'll likely be the due to human transport accidentally. But once it's established, it spreads through two ways: above ground through sap beetles vectoring spores from wounds on trees to other trees, and then it can actually spread underground through root grafting. And then as far as what to be concerned about, if you're looking for it, it's basically most commonly identified by this distinct leaf coloration where the outside margins are discolored and then the inside remains kind of greenish. But really distinct is rapid and extensive leaf drop right in the middle of the growing season. So if you see that on your oaks and there's no other explanation for it, please reach out to us so we can get that evaluated. And then, the closest spot in New York, but oak wilt certainly spreading throughout the nation. And hopefully we'll keep Maine off the map for a long time. So I apologize, I ran a little bit over, but in the remaining time, happy to take any questions. And then if we do run out of time, Ray, feel free to share my email or my phone number, and then anybody can feel free to reach out to me directly with any follow-up questions.
Okay, appreciate all that, Mike. Good presentation. I don't happen to see any questions in the chat. So for now, I think you're okay.
It's a lot to digest. So people might still be overwhelmed, but like I said, anybody thinks of anything down the line, please reach out. I'm happy to discuss anything I talked about or anything else, folks are interested in or have questions about in the forest health realm.
Very good. I appreciate that, Mike. So everybody, thank you for your attendance today. Mike, thanks for your participation and your presentation. And stay tuned sometime here, hopefully this afternoon, I'll get the next invitation out for a presentation next week. That will be the last one that I have scheduled currently. But as I said at the opening, we're still trying to schedule some more. Please, again, don't forget to send your email to Cindy to let her know that you were here today so we can send you a certificate. Again, everyone, thank you very much. Be safe. Mike, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone. Hopefully see you soon.